This is Tech and EdTech. I'm Eric Stano, and I'm joined today by Dr. Annalies Corbin, the CEO and founder of the PAST Foundation, a nonprofit organization that is dedicated to transforming education by integrating anthropology with science and technology, also the author of Hacking School. We're going to be talking today about why Dr. Corbin believes the future of education depends on strategic innovation and not short-term fixes. So welcome, Annalise. I appreciate you joining me today.
Oh, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm looking forward to it.
Well, that's great. Well, let's jump right in and start with what excites you about technology in education today. We'll start broad and then we'll narrow in. But what
Sure.
excites you?
You know, technology in general excites me. I'm going to be perfectly honest. I'm a techie kind of gal, if you will.
Okay.
I love to try new things. I love all the stuff that's happening in the world of technology today. It's just intense because it's so fast, right? And there's a lot of excitement to me in that because there's so many tools and there's so many solutions that are out there, and the ability to be able to play in that space is an opportunity to learn so much. I think that's the thing I get excited about.
Right. So a really exciting context, but to pivot slightly, why do you think innovation of that sort in education so often falls short of real change?
Because of time, right? I guess really, let me back up. So
Sure.
time is definitely one of the key strategies around that, but the other one is a strategy period, right? I think that when we think about innovation generally,
Hmm.
we fail to recognize that innovation requires that there's some real planning around it. Great ideas are awesome, but great ideas cannot become a reality if we don't have strategic thought around what will implementation look like? What are the positives? What are the negatives? What are the consequences? What are the big giant wins that have potential? And oftentimes what I see happening in education, innovation in particular, is there's a lack of understanding that to take great ideas and not just implement them, but sustain them over time, that true strategic way to think about innovation, that's where we've got some pretty substantial gaps that are happening.
And you're sort of touching on this, but maybe just to put even a finer point on it, can you talk a little bit about what you consider to be the pitfalls of reactionary versus
Mhm.
strategic innovation?
We have a thing that happens, right? And that thing that happens, let's go back and pick, a giant one that has been in everybody's ecosystem and sphere in the last 5 years, and that was the arrival of a global pandemic, right? And the reality of that moment was that we threw everything we had at the wall, and across many, many different kinds of industries, but certainly within education, to try to pivot. And the reality of it is we had lots of the pieces and parts that were necessary for us to ensure that we could have learning to continue during that moment. But because we hadn't strategically thought about the way we utilize, for example, technology, is a great element here, then we were not going to be able to be strategic in what we could and couldn't do, how we thought about the people in the equation, and certainly not about the outcomes that we were looking for. There was no strategy around it. So it was 100% reactionary. And for the first couple of weeks, I would argue maybe that's okay. But as it was really clear that this was going to linger on, we needed to sit down and get real strategic real fast. And we did not do that.
Right. I think that sounds like a really good example. You suggested that time is a key
Mhm.
element there, and we weren't really given a heads up that a global pandemic
Right.
was on its way. So time was obviously at a premium there, and the impact you just articulated. I think I have in my notes here, and I think this is another example maybe you've touched on in other settings, but the 2 to 3 year
Mhm.
federal funding cycle and its unintended consequences. Can you talk a little bit about that in this context?
Sure. I refer to this often as the federal band-aid to fix education, right? And that is the reality. If we think about the way most, not all, but most federal funding in the US works. They are on the cycles that are tied to our congressional allocations, and those will be 2, maybe 3-year cycles depending on what you're talking about and, particular which line item or which program or department that it's coming out of has different ways of doing or thinking about these things. But these band-aids, if you will, these new great shiny silver bullet, I've also heard them referred to oftentimes in education as that, or this thing, it's this new thing, we should all be doing it. It's gonna solve X, Y, or Z problem that we're all struggling with. But the problem is that 2 or 3 years is not long enough to have comprehensive systems change effect because culture hasn't shifted around whatever this thing is that we're trying to fix. And the reality is there's humans in the middle of everything, and we have to have culture shift. And if we don't get to the point of any of these initiatives where we've literally changed the culture behind the idea and the way implementation and the human interactions happen, it will not stick. And so we just 2 or 3 years later, the next shiny object shows up. We slap another Band-Aid on that same problem, and oftentimes we don't even pull the old Band-Aid off, right? And so we're
Just
literally
aggregating the band-aids as we go.
we're hemorrhaging the ideas around innovative solutions that should fix our problem. What we're not doing is tackling the root cause of the thing by giving the innovations, the ideas, the research, the R&D that's happening long enough to be tested, to be modified, and then to be systemic in its longevity as a solution. We don't do that.
Right, right. No, and I think there's probably many examples outside of education where this is
Mhm.
also true. But keeping with education, and this was a good preamble, I think, talking about the education system broadly speaking. Let's narrow in, if we could, on schools and AI in
Mm.
particular, because obviously that is a topic that is omnipresent in
Mhm.
everyone's lives, particularly in education. And you've compared today's resistance to AI in schools to how the internet was once feared. And what do you think the lessons are there?
Well, I'll go back to time, right?
How much time do we have to talk about it?
It's a funny thing. We laugh about it. We're chuckling here with each other, but the reality is, I think that that is one of those great equalizers, right? The internet came along and everybody in education threw up their hands. Oh my gosh, right?
Right,
Students are going to be able to look anything up, right? This crazy thing, the internet, and it's unpoliced and it's unstructured. Oh, is it even going to be safe? And what kind of information is going to be out there? And that was the conversation we were all having. And so schools started putting in policies. And don't get me wrong, I'm not arguing that we shouldn't be asking these questions as our
certainly.
roles of protecting children within an educational environment. We absolutely should. But we need to quickly move on from this doom and gloom, oh my gosh, this is going to be a terrible thing, and step back and say, what could this thing, this tool, after all, it is simply a tool, right?
That's right.
What could we learn from and with it? And instead of being reactionary and saying, "Oh my gosh, we have to have policies that say, children can't look anything up on the internet because they'll be cheating."
Right.
Instead, let's teach them what the power of this thing is, right? The internet could give us every opportunity under the sun to learn how to verify and evaluate information.
Right.
How to verify data, and the list goes on and on. Well, AI is exactly I feel like a bit of deja vu, I'm gonna be perfectly honest, right? Because it's exactly, in my mind, the exact same conversation. It's just that it's the
Precisely.
conversation for the year, you know, 2023, 2024, 2025, this moment. And we are doing the same thing. We did not learn the lesson the first time around. That was, at the end of the day, the internet can be a powerful tool that can be utilized for a million different things, and students directly benefit from it.
Right,
Well,
right.
AI is
And
just like that.
yeah, and you can't close Pandora's box,
You
so
can't.
it's best to figure out how you actually utilize it to a positive end.
Mhm.
So given that, what do you think true AI literacy is going to look like in a K through 12 or a post secondary classroom going forward? Once
Mhm.
everyone gets their arms around the fact that this is a
It's
tool
not
that's
going.
not going away, what do you think that's going to look like when folks are literate and able
Mhm.
to use it to the right ends?
Well, let me tell you what I hope it looks like.
Sure.
I will say that with any new thing that gets humans all aflutter, and I'm a bit biased, right? Because I'm an anthropologist, right? And so I'm always going to come
Certainly.
back to the human sort of in the middle of all this. But once the humans get their feathers unruffled over this idea of AI being heavily involved in the education, what I hope is going to happen is that our students are going to be some of the best question askers ever,
Right.
right? Because the AI is only as good as the questions we
Questions.
ask of it. It's not
Of
gonna just
course.
randomly give you something. It can suggest, additional, extensions, which it does, and it does really, really well. But ultimately, I'm hoping that our students will learn to be so complete and specific in terms of way that they understand how you get information out of something. So that's one element. Because right now, I think there's a level of vagueness in the way that kids know how to access information and the data associated with information. And then
Right.
the other thing that I'm really hoping from a literacy standpoint is that our students are so great at vetting information.
Mhm.
They're great at vetting data. They understand that there's a difference between fact and an opinion, and we need and we have both, and we can have both even in the same response. But for them to be able to discern the differences and then form opinions of their own based on the data and the reflective opportunities that they can and should have with that data, that's what I'm hoping for.
And that's a really interesting framing because there's been this long-standing desire that students in any school setting, but certainly in a liberal arts setting, will emerge as critical thinkers,
Mhm.
and people always sort of question. Where is that skill being taught? And it's one of those soft skills
Mhm.
that always seems to be lacking when people emerge from their academic careers into their actual careers, and this sounds like it could be really a catalyst to develop critical thinkers, and also something that I think, if I could go out on a limb here, an information literacy
Mhm.
element to this, where we are awash in so much information. It's long been a desire of many that we become better critical consumers
Mhm.
of the information we're seeing. So if just the use of AI is going to harness and refine those skills, I think that there is a material good in that. And I have to say that comparing it to the advent of the internet keeps bringing that Mark Twain
Mhm.
quote to mind for me. History doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes.
Correct.
And this is invoking that particular quote for me quite a bit. So, how do you think practically, how can educators move from their sort of reflexive fear response to fluency
Mhm.
when it comes to AI? How do you think educators do that?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, and I think that, one of the pieces for educators, right, is, if you're wearing that hat, right, walking that particular path as an educator, the the bombardment, if you will, of all of these inputs that educators have to deal with today that they didn't
Mm,
have to 10, 20, 50 years ago, certainly, right?
right.
It's a lot, and I think that one of the first things that if we can get our collective sets of educators to recognize is in the same way that we want our students to be literate and understand how these tools can be of great benefit to their learning. We want our educators to recognize and understand that AI can be a great tool that can actually lessen the burden as an educator, all of those process pieces, and we understand that AI can automate lots of things that we do. We're seeing it across all industries. But I think that there's a sweet spot for our educators, first and foremost, to embrace this tool as a helpmate. And I think that that is a
Mhm.
piece of what has to happen. The second piece of that then is to once that happens and we can get educators comfortable in how they can use the tool to make their jobs and their experience easier, better, more fulfilling, take your pick
Right.
of which
Right.
phrase you wanna add to that. The next piece of it is it's an opportunity to free themselves from the constraints of a sort of rote, process-driven, um
Mhm.
sort of feeling of the work that I'm supposed to be doing and will allow them to shift back to the thing that took most people into education in the first place, right? Is that love of learning or that love of helping others find a love of learning and knowledge,
Right.
right? And
Right.
so if we can get our educators to shift and understand that AI gives us the opportunity to teach our students a whole set of skills that we have an obligation to teach them anyway. This is not
Right.
even a new standard, right? It's an amplification of a standard that we've traditionally struggled to figure out how to help our students attain. And the reality of it is that if we don't help our students be great, brilliant users, understanders, coders, writers, deliverers, right, of
Mhm.
AI, when they graduate and move on to be those fully functional humans we want in our communities and society, then we
Right.
are doing them a huge disservice because they're all going to have to be able to do it in their jobs.
Right, right. And actually, this not to put you on the spot with this question, but I hear you as to the goal, and I've actually written myself about the possibility that AI can alleviate some of the pressures on teachers, maybe
Mhm.
even alleviate some of the teacher shortages that we experience, through deploying AI in certain discrete places. But how do you think we catalyze that epiphany among educators? How do you think we get them to that point? Do you have any advice for
Mm.
those like you who might have that perspective and understand that the future can look brighter and better for teachers if we're able to harness AI in the right way? But is there any practical advice that you would have to get educators from point A to point B on that front?
I think the first one that I would put out there is, there's this interesting dichotomy when it comes to new technologies, and I have no doubt you've seen it across many different industries, and that's this fear that whatever this thing is, that it is going to take my job or modify my job in such a way it's not the thing that I know or that I'm doing. And I think that for educators,
Mhm.
one of the elements is that, as they embrace this new technology, it should free them up to have a different set of relationships with their students, right? So,
Right.
the other thing that's really interesting, we haven't really touched on, but I think gets to the heart of the question that you're asking
Yeah.
is that in education, traditionally, we have had a very, very long-standing history, and for very good reasons, that we have to be an expert in something,
Mhm.
especially as we get into the higher grades, right?
Right.
That we
Right.
have to be the expert in math, or we have to be the expert in social study, that's our content, right? The
Right.
expertise that we were hired to be, the XYZ teacher.
Right, right.
And the
The
real
oracle of sorts that,
Yeah.
people. Yes, yes.
Exactly, but we also now know, and most teachers, even those that are staunch about their content, that this is the thing, but that's not what students want or need, and it's certainly not the way that our students in the modern era that we live in right now relate to the world, right? They do not see the disconnect between mathematics and science, for example, right? Because
Right.
one does
Right.
not exist without the other. And so
Precisely.
the fact that we're still so rigidly content driven, I think is one of the other things that for educators to truly be that mentor or that facilitator of learning, unless
Mhm.
that singular sage on that stage with a spotlight,
Right. Right.
when we make that shift, that's what I see with the educators that we work with. As soon as they realize, oh my gosh, I can partner with my other fellow teachers, or I can, bring in folks from the community, and not in the old show and tell ways, but literally to design projects and programs, if you will, that our students can engage in and learn the things they need to do. Our kids will love it, but more importantly, it frees me up to also then bring to the table my own superpowers or passions, which in a traditional setting I do not get to
Right.
show up. I have to leave them at home. And
Right.
that's
Right. Right.
freeing to the human soul, right?
Absolutely. No, and an inspiring potential future where as you said, the relationship between the instructor and the student changes, and the nature of the competencies that we're
Mhm.
developing in students changes. So that's yeah, a potentially bright future for all able to mute our fear instinct and really try and embrace the change that's again not going away.
Right.
Yeah, one of the only constants is change. Well, let's shift gears a little bit, if we could, and I'd love to talk a little bit about your 2024 book, Hacking School. I noted that Kirkus Reviews called it an impressively thoughtful and thoroughly practical guide for educational reform, which is again sort of very much in keeping with what we've already
Mhm.
begun discussing here. But what inspired you to write Hacking School?
That's a great question. I've been at this space of thinking about transformative education for more than 2 decades. And in that work, I sometimes felt like I was beating my head against a brick wall, right?
Mhm.
In all honesty. Again, these federal band-aids that we already talked about, these innovations, they were showing up. We were running just full bore as teachers or schools or district towards this thing, and then the wheels would fall off, and at the end
Right.
of the day it wasn't changing anything for our students, and as practitioners it was just frustrating us to no end, almost to the point that I can't tell you how many conversations I've had with an educator. This new thing was coming in, a district had heavily invested, we're going to do all this PD, all this training, and
Mhm.
I will tell you that they would say to me, I'm just not gonna do this. If I just wait, 2 years from now, we'll be doing something else anyway. I don't need to invest in this."
The instinct to wait it out. I get that.
Correct. And I was seeing that a lot of that, right? And so hacking school is really around this idea of examining the innovations in education that were showing up and lasting. I mean, that was my research question, if you will, right? So I really wanted to understand the really true innovative programs that 10 years after some amazing teacher or a group of educators came together and said, we're going to do this thing and we're going to do it with full fidelity and we're going to run full on. And 10 years later, it's still happening. And I wanted to know, was there some magic to those? Because most of them fail, they're not
Right.
sustained. And what I found was yes, there is some magic in the fact that those that lasted 10 years or more had these 5 consistent things. They all have other things too, right? Because that's sort of how
Mhm.
innovation works. But I wrote the book because I wanted to be able, A, to tell the story of these innovations that really work, but more importantly, the practitioners who were living these 5 elements that I was finding, because I also found that many educators were doing pieces and parts of these things, like the words, these concepts were not new when I would talk to the individual educators. And what I found was they couldn't figure out how to catalyze these things into their own practice or pedagogical sort of approaches in their own classrooms or their own schools. And so I wrote it honestly to celebrate these people that were doing amazing things, because we hear an awful lot about what's not working and we don't
Certainly.
spend enough time celebrating the things that are.
Nice, nice. Well, let's talk. You mentioned the five
Mhm.
elements that are important for lasting change, and if I've got these right, those are student agency, cultural relevancy, mastery based learning, transdisciplinary approaches, and problem based learning. Do you want to kind of just walk us through those five elements and just say a little bit more about how you think they contribute to lasting change?
Sure, absolutely. Thank you for that. And I would also like to say that we see these. I'll preface this: is we see this across all of these sort of innovations that are touching on education today. So that's going to be anything that has to do with technology innovations, that's practical innovations or pedagogical shifts and changes, research, you name it. I've seen these play out in all of these elements in education, which is why I felt it was really, really important to put this work out there. So, student agency is all about recognize that students need to learn how to advocate for themselves, that voice and choice, which is literally what you often hear associated with the idea of student agency, but it's
Sure.
more than that, right? What student agency in this case really means is that students co-design. They have ownership over their learning journey, whatever that journey is going to be. That students
Mhm.
have an active role in determining or making choices along that journey. Critically important. Students are engaged with us, they're going to opt in. And no matter what that thing happens to be, even if it's they're like,
Right.
well, this is not really for me, but because you gave me the option or you gave me options within it, it's going to be an easier game to play.
Right.
The next one is around cultural relevancy or resiliency.
Mhm.
There are lots of words that get thrown out with this. And what this really means at its heart is whatever the thing is that we're doing, if the participants can't relate to it, right? So,
Right.
I'm using this term in its broadest sense. I'm not honing in on a particular thing that policymakers may or may not be arguing over. That's not what this is about. This
Right.
is about recognizing who your learners are and making
Mhm.
sure that whatever these program elements, the content you're teaching, you name it, that they can see themselves in it. Because if they
Right.
can't see themselves in it, they're just going to turn you off.
Right. Right.
Especially, as kids get older.
So really, pairing really student empowerment over
Mhm.
their own learning journey with some sense of meaning and
Yeah.
relevance to them.
Mhm.
Those two make a lot of sense together. How about mastery based learning?
Sure. So, mastery based learning or competency based learning is this idea, and I get to use time again here. So, see how we bring this all back together. And so, this is based on the idea that we have to give our students sort of time and space to dig into the stuff we want them to know, right? If we only teach it on Tuesday at 2 o'clock and we're on page 34, and then on Wednesday we move on to a completely different concept, and it doesn't really make any difference whether our kids get it or not, we are never going to have students that master something or they have enough knowledge of whatever that thing is to either apply it or synthesize it down the road. And that's what
Right.
happens in a lot of really prescriptive learning environments. So this idea around mastery base says, you know what? We're going to throw some of those constraints to the wind, not all of them, let's be real. But we're going to give our students time to dig. And if they go down a rabbit hole, that's okay because there's so much opportunity to learn through the rabbit hole itself. And so that's what mastery is about. Just really recognizing that, sometimes you don't get it the first time.
And I can see how that is resonant and in keeping with again the first couple of elements that we've talked
Mhm.
about, student agency. It seems to again further that sense of empowerment and really letting the student take some or have some sense of ownership of their own learning journey. What about transdisciplinary approaches?
Yeah, this is my favorite one. So transdisciplinary gets us to breaking down those silos. Once again, it
Right.
comes back to that content. And this is where we give context to what we want our learners to experience and to really sort of take in. This is that opportunity for us not just to co-teach or to be multidisciplinary, but to truly recognize that to solve really big, hairy, audacious, wicked problems out in the world, right?
Right.
That
Right.
we have to bring everything to bear. We have to understand all sides of the problem to be able to actually come up with solutions or potential solutions. And we cannot do that if we continue to put content or understanding into very, very discrete buckets. So
Right.
transdisciplinary just says that we're going to give context to everything that we teach and recognize it doesn't matter that I'm the social studies teacher, but now we got to talk about math for 5 minutes.
Right, right. No, and I can see how even that, and correct me if I'm making too great a leap here, but your earlier element of cultural relevancy
Mhm.
and creating some meaning, a transdisciplinary approach sort of to me recognizes uh, meaning again, just recognizing the world in which we exist. You're not going to encounter a math problem on the corner of 22nd and 7th, and
Correct.
then a history problem when you're driving to work, or an English problem over in this neighborhood. They're all going to be blended together in just the way that the world works and the way we live within it. So
Correct.
I can get the sense that that itself creates
Mhm.
some meaning for the student, where they can see themselves in it because they
Correct.
recognize the world in which they exist.
Right.
Um, Problem-based learning, the last of the
Mhm.
five elements. Do you want to say something about that?
Yeah, and problem-based learning is anything on that continuum that's really hands-on or that inquiry. So we know that students sitting in a row with, some old white guy, in many cases, or someone who's completely unrelated to the students sitting in the room, lecturing to them is not getting our students engaged in their learning. But if we can utilize hands-on, very applied, opportunities for students just to really, really dig in, that that's where a lot of the magic can happen for our students. And problem-based as opposed to inquiry or project-based, those are all part of the continuum. I use the
Right.
umbrella of problem-based because it's the most complex, the highest order along that continuum. And it's very, very, very difficult to do and be a true problem-based learning environment or ecosystem, if you will. But it's the thing that as educators, if we can aspire to that for our students and we recognize in the problem-based environment that there's not a singular answer to solving a problem. There's many possible solutions, and that there are gonna be elements of possible solutions, right, that are gonna have meaning and relevance for whatever it is that we're tackling. So it gets us to the point where as educators, we think about the way that we wanna structure our learning environment, so that students have the greatest opportunity for, 1 through 4 to happen.
Right, and what I like about all of these, even speaking as one of those old white guys who's like
Mhm,
unlikely to, motivate learning. What I love about these five elements: the student agency, the cultural relevancy, the mastery based learning, the transdisciplinary approaches, the problem based learning, is they all together seem to pull learning out of the ivory tower and
mhm,
situate it in the world in which the students live. It
mhm,
puts it in the students' hands. It gives them agency, and they're operating again in the world in which we all exist. So it all just together suggests a lot more meaning than I think maybe our traditional approaches to learning might have suggested.
mhm.
And correct me if I got any of that wrong, or mischaracterized any of that.
No, I mean, 100%, right? And that's
Okay.
really at the end of the day, what we're really hoping for. And what's interesting with those 5 things is, like I said, the innovations that stuck around, these great programs, right? These amazing experiences that students remember and talk about for years and years and years later. They all
Right.
have elements of these 5 things. And the ones that don't make it, they tend to be missing. at least if 1 or 2 of them, if not, um, 3 of them in particular, right? And so it's really important to recognize that as these innovative programs sort of progress and new educators come to them, they bring their own innovations, and so the innovation actually grows somewhat exponentially when this solid foundation exists for it to do so.
Right, right. Of the 5 elements, here, is there one that you think, schools tend to struggle with the most?
Mhm.
What's sort of the low-hanging fruit on the problem with adopting some of these approaches or perspectives?
Sure. So the one that a district will struggle with the most. So there's two pieces to this answer. So that one's going to be mastery or competency based, right? Because
Uh-huh.
oftentimes they perceive, whether it's true or not, that you have to have policy change for that to even be possible, right? We're going to give up giving A, B, C, D, or F grades. And instead, we're going to give everybody the chance to earn a minimum of, I don't know, 85%. I'm just making something up, right? Because
Sure,
we see
sure.
mastery in different formats, different places.
Mhm, mhm.
So the perception is we have to have a policy shift to make that happen. That's not it's a bit on the false side, right? Because we could bring mastery into an individual classroom and still assign grades, but we struggle with being able to separate those things out. So that's one half of the answer. The other half of my answer to you, but in the practical sense, what's the one that is absolutely the hardest as an educator and as a learner and as a community to embrace and really run with? It's going to be problem based. And the reason for that is because we feel like that when we shift into a either inquiry project or problem based sort of environment that we're led that it's more fun and therefore we're not doing the rigorous things that we're testing or we think, right? And so our learners might be missing something. So from a truly practical standpoint, I would say it's the problem based space that folks struggle with the most. The irony, of course, is once your students learn how to function in that type of environment or
Uh-huh,
architecture of learning,
uh-huh.
the students will excel. They will outperform students doing the traditional classroom every single time. But there's
Right.
gonna be a down dip first as they learn how to adjust to, "I'm not memorizing, I'm not doing homework the same way, I'm not doing all of these elements."
Right, right. And it may be a little far afield at this point, but as you've been talking, and as I've been sitting here getting quietly inspired about the potential that these 5 elements hold, it keeps bringing to mind my own college experience. And there was
Mhm,
a philosophy professor who asked us one day. Kurt Vonnegut had recently been on campus and gave a lecture, which I attended and of
mhm,
course loved and learned a great deal from. And the next class period, this philosophy class, the instructor asked who had gone to see and listen to Kurt Vonnegut, and a handful of us raised our hands, and he looked, a little unhappy at that level of response, and went around the room and was asking the question like, "Well, why didn't you go? Why didn't you go?" What? And people were coming up with, "Well, I had to study. I had X class here. I had
mhm,
X class there. I had whatever it was." And he just stood back and then gave us a piece of wisdom that I have not forgotten. He said, "Never, never let your school get in the way of your learning."
hmm.
And I think that
I love that.
what you're flashing forward to is a time and a place when schools will, in a much more effective fashion, really catalyze and fuel that learning in a way that they're probably laboring toward these days,
Mhm.
but haven't quite gotten there yet. Okay, let's shift, if we could, to a little bit of a lightning round here.
Sure.
So, I'm going to ask you a couple questions here, and off the top of your head, give me your answer. First is, what is one ed tech trend you are cautiously optimistic about?
Digital portfolios.
Ooh, say more about that.
So they've been around for a long time. This is not a new concept, right? But this idea that learners can go out into the world, right? In my perfect world,
Uh-huh.
school is no longer in the box with a roof on top. A school is
Hmm.
everywhere. And in every experience that I have can somehow be captured and cataloged for me, owned by me, and I can
Mhm.
get credit for it for the things I have to do to get through to the next stage. So I am super, super excited about the possibility of a world in which I own my data, but more importantly, I own how my data is being utilized and interpreted by the outside world for my benefit.
That is aspirational, but I agree with your optimism
Mhm.
around that, or at least I'm hopeful that your optimism pays off in
Ah,
this
yeah.
particular case. All right, continuing with the lightning round. What's one thing you wish every school leader would stop doing?
Ringing bells.
And why is that?
We're humans, right? I mean, seriously, why are we ringing bells to tell us when to suddenly leap out of a chair and move to something else? It's so artificial. There's nothing real about it. There's nothing else in our lives that works this way. What the heck?
Actually, I find that funny for a variety of reasons. One of them is in my own product development background. I've designed products for years, and the people asking for them or thinking about them will often ask for what they call bells and whistles.
Mhm,
And I found myself pursuing those for many years, but then finally had this epiphany some years ago where I said, you know what a synonym for bells and whistles is? Noise. It's
mhm,
just noise.
mhm.
We want this product to be a signal through it, but I appreciate your note on bells just being artificial and and frankly noisy. Um,
Well, and if we want our kids to learn time management, what are we doing? Right?
yeah, yeah. Treating them like cattle is probably not the best way to go about that. You're absolutely right. Um, okay, last question. If you had 10 minutes in a room full of district tech directors,
Mhm.
what would you say to them?
I would tell them, "Stop with district-wide deployments of anything. Just don't do that. You're setting yourself up to fail." You're always going to have these people that if given the opportunity to try and do something new and different, they're gonna raise their hand. They're gonna be your early adopters every single time. Make
Great.
use of them. These are the people that you want to try a thing, give you feedback because they will give you feedback not because they don't wanna do it, but because they actually are super interested and they believe you wanna hear from them. And they will then help you chart the course to bigger and broader implementation.
Well, that's fantastic. I appreciate that perspective, and I hope, even though they didn't get 10 minutes of that, the listeners here will nevertheless take you up on that directive.
Mhm.
Well, listen, Dr. Corbin, I really appreciate you joining me today. This has been a fabulous conversation, and before we part ways, if you could let listeners know where they can learn a little bit more about the Past Foundation and where they could find Hacking School.
Sure. Past Foundation, you can definitely get information at our website, just pastfoundation.org, and it's PAST. I get asked that question all the time, pastfoundation.org. And the book, you can get it anywhere that you like to order books online or whatnot. Amazon, Barnes and Noble, all of those places. You can find Hacking School 5 Strategies to Link Learning to Life.
Fabulous. And before again we go, any final thoughts? What gives you hope about the future of EdTech? Any final thoughts around that?
I think the future of ed tech is wide frickin' open, if you will, right? Because the rate and pace of change, as we know with technology, it is unlike anything we've seen in a really long time. And I think that's really exciting if you're not afraid of technology and you recognize that technology is a tool, and so figure out quickly, what to do with that tool, but that makes me really excited, right? Because if the solution that's out there right now doesn't actually work for us, literally wait 5 minutes. There's gonna be something else that pops up that might be just what you're looking for. That's exciting.
Right. Just like the weather in Florida, just wait five
Correct.
minutes and
Wait
it'll
5
change
minutes.
completely.
It's true.
Well, Dr. Corbin, again, thank you so much for joining me today. Thanks to all the listeners. Again, this has been Tech in EdTech. I'm Eric Stano, and thank you for listening.
Thank you.